What's going on, everybody, and welcome into another edition of Burke's Beat. I'm Danny Burke, your host. We've got an awesome episode ahead for you as we are going to be joined by Las Vegas legend, sports betting legend, Bruce Marshall, now with CBS SportsLine, has done some amazing work over the years in Sin City. It's been a pleasure to be able to get to know him. I had him on my show numerous times the past several years when I was with VSiN, and again, just one of the sharpest minds in the business. And man, I got my butt kicked in the opening rounds of March Madness. I know a lot of people who did as well. Even guys behind the counter, the sports books, were defeated based on what we saw these favorites do in the first couple of rounds. But Bruce made up on top, and it's not because he was chasing the chalk or anything like that. He was on the right sides. I mean, that's just what he's done year after year, season after season, in sport after sport. It's not just college basketball. The man finds success everywhere. So he will be joining us momentarily. I implore you to listen closely to what he says because, again, he is one of the sharpest minds in the business. A pleasure to have a conversation with him regarding some of the most exciting games in the tournament. Before we get into that, though, I did just want to recap what exactly transpired in the first round and the second round, the first weekend, I guess I was going to say, of the tournament, because I told you it seems like everybody got their butts kicked. I guess unless you were just blindly betting all the favorites. The favorites ended up finishing 36-12 straight up, 29-18-1 against the spread. That's a clip of just under 62%. The overs had a little bit higher mark. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it wasn't really profitable. I'm sure you saw this on Twitter. There was a trend going around of this guy just blindly betting every single underdog on the money line. And after Thursday and a little bit of Friday, he was doing well, was making a profit. And then a lot of people started following it, and quite the opposite occurred. Saturday and Sunday was an absolute bloodbath for anybody who was betting on the underdogs. It was remarkable, and it's not what we've been accustomed to in March Madness. Cinderella stories. You usually see these underdogs come through. But let's look at these Saturday and Sunday numbers. So, on Saturday, they were 8-0 straight up. On Sunday, they were 7-1 straight up, 5-3 against the spread. Do we expect that to happen? Who the hell knows, to be honest? Nobody knows. But usually, you kind of, water finds its surface, and things are going to level out. It's just remarkable what had transpired with that. Saturday, all the favorites won. Clemson being the only underdog to win outright on Sunday. And we'll see what underdogs can prevail this upcoming slate of games. I've got a couple of them in my back pocket, so hopefully the tides turn just a little bit. So yes, let's get into it with Bruce Marshall. He'll tell us his thoughts on every single game. He'll give us a couple teams as well that maybe you could take a little flyer on to win the whole damn thing, or at least get to the Final Four. And then at the end, in the outro, I recap some of my action, give a little bit deeper explanation of the plays that I'm making. But yeah, that's what we got for this episode. So strap in, here we go. Bruce Marshall joining us on Burke's Beat. All right, now it is time to welcome on a very special guest, very fortunate to spend some time with our guy, Bruce Marshall, Vegas insider for quite some time, currently with CBS SportsLine. And he has been, I think, last I saw, Bruce, it seemed like you were crushing it the first couple of rounds. It seems like everybody else has been getting their butts kicked, but you made it out all right those first few days. Is that right?
Yeah, we did okay the first couple days, Danny. It seemed to work all right. But the ones you lose are the ones you remember. I'm still kind of kicking myself for that Oregon game against Creighton. That was a tough one to lose when you had Oregon. But overall, we're hanging in there. And actually, the other tournament's doing pretty good. We won all three in the CBI yesterday. So more action there in the NIT tonight as well.
Beautiful. Love to hear it. And yes, you put it perfectly. I mean, the ones you lose just sting so much more. You could go 5-1 and that one loss, if it was a bad beat, that's what's going to hang over your head for quite some time. But always love getting your insight, Bruce. I mean, I've known Bruce for a few years now, more than that when I was at VSiN, and it was always a pleasure to get you on it again. Just can't stress enough how sharp Bruce's mind is. So when you guys are all listening, make sure you take some notes here because we've got a lot of action to unpack for the Sweet 16. And let's go ahead and start just in order of when these games are tipping off. So on Thursday, Bruce, we've got the 2 seed Arizona against the 6 seed Clemson. And look, Arizona has been a dominant team all year. The issue that a lot of people have had from time to time with them is their inabilities to advance far in the tournament. But this is a great rebounding team. They're top 10 in Ken Pom both in adjusted offensive efficiency, adjusted defensive efficiency. Clemson has, at least in my mind, and I'm sure a lot of other people's, exceeded expectations, line up to about 7.5. Will Clemson keep the magic going, or will Arizona just outpower them on the boards and elsewhere?
I think Clemson can hang in here, Danny, and has a shot. Although they've broken my heart a few times this season. Right when you get excited about Clemson, they throw in a stinker like against BC in the ACC tournament. But I mean, this team won at Alabama. They won at North Carolina. Darn near should have won at Duke. So they're veteran. A lot of fifth-year seniors there. PJ Hall. Now they're going to need Hall, very versatile 6'10" guy. You've talked about him before, I know, but he had some foul trouble on the weekend in the sub-regionals. Only 19 minutes on the Baylor game on Sunday, yet they still won. But they've got experience, like I said, Chase Hunter, fifth-year point guard. He scored 20 plus in 2 games. For the first time this season, Joseph Girard, 3 over from Syracuse, gave them the spot shooter they wanted. So if 2 of those 3 guys are really on song, they have got a shot. I am still not convinced about Arizona. They look really good when things are going their way. But I remind this team lost on the road at Oregon State. They lost at Stanford. They lost at USC. These are all sub 500 Pac 12 teams. I know this game is not in Tucson. They are going to have a crowd supporting them in LA. Like if they make it all the way to Final Four, they will definitely have the crowd in Phoenix. But I still think Caleb Love's a little problem for this team. I know a lot of people love him, but just watch their games. I mean, when he goes out, they seem to perform a little better. And I thought his absence from North Carolina, and we'll talk about the Heels in a minute, actually helped the Heels a lot. When he gets the ball sort of dies in his hands. And too many times in these close games, I've seen Arizona just be Larson and Love down the stretch. They don't get Kennard Johnson and Ballo involved as much. I've seen the noose tighten around the neck of this team and them not respond in the past. So I'm going to take Clemson here. I think they've actually got a shot to win this thing. And this is the real sleeper team, along with the other ACC rep, NC State. We'll talk about them in a minute. Clemson's interesting here, so I'll give them a whirl.
All right, Bruce, leaning toward the side of Clemson there, catching about 7 in the hook, been a ferocious team in those first couple of games. And perhaps, yeah, this is a spot where Arizona does indeed fall short. But that's a great game to get things kicked off on Thursday. After that, we're going to get arguably the best team in the country taking on San Diego State. We know this is a rematch of last year's championship game. Was kind of a dud. I mean, 76-59, just an absolute dominating performance from the Huskies. And now we see this spread for this matchup as high as 11 seems to be the consensus mark. Opened as low as 10, moved a point in favor of the Huskies. Is that number set appropriately, Bruce? Are we almost not giving enough respect to UConn? Do we think the added incentive of getting beat in the championship game adds any merit to backing the Aztecs? How do we break down this one?
Well, Danny, interesting. I mean, that number shot up pretty quick. I even saw some 9.5s out there for a bit on Sunday night, and
Mm.
then went up to 11 pretty quick. San Diego State, yeah, gets the rematch. I mean, instead of it was in Texas last year, and instead of back towards San Diego, now they go to the East Coast up to Boston. By the way, that's a great scheduling for UConn to bus trips to Brooklyn and Boston. They don't have to fly anywhere the first 2 weekends. I don't think it's going to be much different than the title game last year. UConn's not really the same team, sort of. I mean, they got some of the same parts as last year. Klingon is a lot better than he was last year down on the blocks, and I just don't see Lede really dictating the whole game against these guys like he has been for much of the time in the Mountain West. And they lost several Mountain West games this year, by the way. And last weekend, I mean, he's very rugged, rough down on the blocks, and he gets away with some stuff like I thought he did in the UAB game last week. but it ain't going to work against UConn. And if their top option is not dominating, and that's where San Diego State has lost this season, I think too much Lede, not enough the guards who really were sort of driving the offense last year. I'm not sure San Diego State is as good as it was last year, and UConn is looking every bit as good. And introducing Castle into the mix is really something. I'm not picking against these guys, not yet. You're going to need a little better balanced team, which we might see on the weekend with against UConn from the other Sweet 16, not the Aztecs. So I'll lay the points with the UConn here.
Is there a number that you would play it up to? Because as we know, say a lot of people listening to this podcast may not get their bets until last second. And if the line trends toward UConn still, is there a point where you go, all right, don't lay the chalk anymore? Or is it just like, nah, you gotta get it at 11 now. Anything over, you probably just stay away and wait to see if you get a better in-game price.
Well, yeah, maybe the latter. I mean, if you want to wait for the end game, I tend to think this is going to be like the game last year. UConn's going to jump in early, and the prices aren't going to be better in game. So I think it's probably now. I don't think it's going to move back to San Diego State. Where would I draw the line? I could see this getting to 11 and a half. You might even see 12 before tip off. I wouldn't go beyond that. But right now, 11. I think that if you get it now, I think this might be the best price you get because if they start quick, like I think they will in this game, the end games aren't going to give you any break either. So if it goes the way I think, so right now is probably the best I think you could do with UConn.
Yeah, I'm in the same line of thinking as you here with this matchup. I mean, UConn just seems so dominant. In San Diego State, we know them for having this defensive prowess and being able to control their opponents in that facet. And I just don't think you're going to be able to do that with one of the best offenses in the country. Ken Palm has UConn second in adjusted offensive efficiency, only behind the Fighting Illini, which we'll get to momentarily. Now, not saying that you have a play on this or you need to give out something with a lot of conviction, but handicapping this game, Bruce, yes, I'm with you and laying the 11 with UConn, but I was also just a little curious your thoughts and wanted to pick your brain on something like a team total under for San Diego State. I'm seeing 62 and a half. San Diego State 53rd in adjusted offensive efficiency, eighth defensively we see for UConn. And I guess you could argue to not do that if it is a blowout and you get some garbage time buckets and the backups come in and that, helps San Diego State going against this UConn defense. But just again, curious your thoughts on a team total prop and if that's something you've been interested in this tournament in general.
At times, in this one, not as much because I see this being sort of UConn cruising at the end, and the last 3 minutes or so it'll be backups in there, and they're going to be the ones to decide that, and that's always sort of a risky proposition. I might even come in against the spread too. I will just say this one more thing about San Diego State: the team that can beat UConn is going to be one that can really shoot and
Mhm.
like Creighton did in that game last month, and really hit a bunch of threes. I think that's the only way you beat these guys, and I don't see San Diego State doing that. I'd be inclined to think they may not get over 62 and a half, but I'm probably not too strong on that one.
All right, let's move along. 9:39 p.m. Eastern Time. We've got North Carolina taking on Alabama. Both of these teams had a little bit of a scare. North Carolina just at the beginning stages against Michigan State, but then they really took care of business. Alabama, as we know, came down to the wire until those last few minutes, and then Grant Canyon just refused to keep that contest close. And a tough beat for anybody who was sweating out taking the points with the Lopes, and then all for that to just come down to Alabama getting an 11-point victory. We see this spread feature North Carolina as about a 4-point favorite and the highest total on the board, about that 173 range, opened as high as 175. So offense, of course, is to be expected here, Bruce. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I was a little surprised that like a lot of people that Grand Canyon game was as low scoring as it was, though I think that's the way Alabama is going to have to win some games if it wants to go much further in the tournament. They're not going to be able to. It's not going to be like the Charleston game, just up and down the court. They're going to run into somebody like they did during the regular season, like the Kentucky game and some others where they just got outscored. But they did show some poise down the stretch. I thought they were in real trouble against Grand Canyon, so they showed me something they didn't have. But they want to play faster. North Carolina is glad to do that if Alabama really wants to. North Carolina is such a well-oiled machine right now. I just think they could end up scoring like on every possession in this game once they get going. The way Harrison Ingram is attacking the boards now, that is an extra bonus. And We mentioned Caleb Love a minute ago. I think having him gone this year has helped this team. It's put the ball in Davis's hands more. He's had a Wooden Award type year, and we know what Baycott can do. And those are two guys who were around for the run all the way to the Final Four in the title game a couple of years ago. But these portal ads, Ryan and Ingram, really fit in this year for Hubert. Very shrewd on his parts because they could play within the framework. The ball doesn't disappear in their hands like it did when Love was there. And you can see both those guys have had big games along the way. It's a perfectly oiled machine right now. And the way they came back on Michigan State, when I thought they were in real trouble in the first 10 minutes or so, and all of a sudden they shifted gears. And there's times this might, be the best team in the country on certain nights. And I wouldn't say that about Bama. So I think North Carolina gets there. The total, yeah, I've looked under a couple of times Alabama and these numbers in the 170s, and it goes over. I know the Grand Canyon game did, but I'm inclined to think this might go over too, just because North Carolina has got so many different ways it can score, and they're scoring a lot. I mean, mid 80s against Michigan State, they scored 90 in the first round. I mean, they're really hitting on all cylinders now, so it might go over, but I think this is a price you can take it with with the Tar Heels and go from there.
So, Bruce, why do you think the market is, if you want to call it this, maybe disrespecting North Carolina as this one seed? I mean, Izzo going up against the Tar Heels, and it just seemed like everybody still stood by that narrative of Izzo in March, and maybe a little bit of recency bias with them overcoming their first round matchup against Mississippi State. I mean, yeah, I was someone who liked Michigan State, but in my mind, that didn't mean that I thought that they had a great opportunity against the Tar Heels. I thought it'd be competitive, but not that they would get the outright win. And then I found myself kind of overthinking it because of what the market displayed between the Spartans and the Tar Heels. So, what do you make to that? Was that overreaction? Was that people actually thinking Michigan State was the better team? Or what was going on there?
Yeah, I think the market seems to underestimate Hubert, and it might be some from last year when they were ready to buy into North Carolina and it just didn't work, and it really didn't work for them last year. So I think there's some of that left over there, but I mean, he certainly pushed the right buttons down the stretch 2 years ago. And maybe the ACC final game there, though that shouldn't be too big a deal because that game didn't mean a lot to North Carolina other than just winning the ACC tournament, but ran into a hot NC State. So maybe some of the market has been burned a couple times by North Carolina when they're ready to fall in love with the Heels. So maybe that has something to do with it. But I'm there with it. I mean, I think this team is fantastic, and it was like I was on them 2 years ago when they were running all the way to the final, and I'll stay on them again here at least on Thursday night against the Crimson Tide.
All right, final game of Thursday. Let's talk Illinois and Iowa State, Bruce. Arguably the most anticipated game of the evening. This was pretty fascinating to watch where these lines move. So, for example, DraftKings has done a pretty good job at being the first to post these lines. Now, we know the reputation they have of who's being able to bet there, but nevertheless, they opened Iowa State minus 3.5, circa tad bit more respected sports book in terms of who they allow to wager there. They opened it at -2 in the hook. Offshore at a place like Bet Online, they had it at -1.5. So again, it's been all over the place. Right now, consensus seems to be about -1 in the hook in favor of the Cyclones, although there are some straggling twos out there. I personally took 2 points with the Fighting Illini. I think Terrence Shannon Jr. makes all the difference, and that Illinois can step up defensively enough in this outing to pull through. And Illinois really good, or maybe not really good, but better in terms of what they can do at the charity stripe. 70th, according to Bart Torvik, in free throw rate, 31st defensively, 15th in offensive rebound percentage, 67th defensively. ISU a tad bit worse in all of those categories. Those basic fundamentals that maybe a lot of people don't account for as much. I believe Illinois does it better, and they have that difference maker that you want to rely on at this point in the year. And it's odd because I've been against Illinois for quite some time, but I'm trying to get my recency bias of what I thought about them heading into the tournament out of my head and not just wanting to go against them because I thought that originally, but understanding that, hey, maybe I overlooked this team a tad bit too much. Am I off base here? Do you think the same? How do you make up this one?
I kind of like Illinois too, and there were times this year when I wondered. I mean, that Penn State game they played at the old place at Penn State back in February where they lost. And some of the games like that sort of bothered me. And defensively, they don't always bring it the way they could, and that's the edge that the Cyclones probably have here. But you mentioned Shannon. I mean, you could argue he's the best player in the country right now, and certainly from the Big Ten tournament on, he's been spectacular. But they hit you a lot of different ways. Domask, it took him a little while. It took about till mid-December when he started to get comfy there, and he's a really unique weapon, sort of like a point forward. Hawkins is a very unique weapon at 6'10". Dinja gives them some presence down in the blocks. I mean, the pieces are there, and for them, it's just can the defense step it up? They are also bigger on the perimeter. They're bigger at the guard spots than Iowa State. Now, Iowa State's guards are pretty tough, Lipsy and those guys, and they seem to make plays. We know how well they play defense, but I just see more difference makers on the Illinois side here, and the upside is really there for these guys. And I mean, I've talked to some people who think this could be the best team in the country if all the hitting on all the cylinders. And Iowa State does not have a guy like Shannon. I think in a game like this, he makes a difference. He could end up being the MOP of the entire tournament if he continues to go. I think Illinois advances here, so I'm going to give the Illini a vote.
All right, love to hear it. Bruce on the same side as myself. Like to get that validation. Give me a little bit more vote of confidence. But yeah, that's the first bet that I looked to making was taking a couple points with Illinois just for a tad bit of security. No problem with taking the money line there. But at this point in March, I'm always willing to take some points if I'm going to be offered them. So that's a direction I as well am going to be riding between Illinois and Iowa State to cap off Thursday's slate of games. Moving on to Friday, Bruce, I know one game in particular has piqued your interest, and it's the first one of Friday. So 7:09 p.m. Eastern Time, the 11th seed NC State taking on the number 2 seed Marquette. 6.5 is where we see the spread. Before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of it, you brought up a point to me before we started recording about kind of a storyline nobody's talking about, really. A rematch of these two teams from 50 years ago in the title game. Speak a little bit more on that.
Well, I'm old enough to actually remember that. The Monday night this week was actually the actual 50-year anniversary of the 74 title game, which a lot of people have forgotten because the big game that weekend and the one Sports Illustrated put on the cover was NC State and David Thompson knocking off UCLA, ending the 7 straight championships, 38 straight NC2A tourney wins by John Wooden. And that was one of the great games of all time, double overtime and all that. But, I mean, Marquette in the final beat Kansas in the other semi, and that was Al McGuire, Maurice Lucas, star of the team. They were playing with NC State in the final. It was in Greensboro, so it was a big crowd for the Wolfpack there. But late in the first half, Marquette got to a 1-point lead. However, a controversial play after Marcus Washington made a layup. They called a foul on him after the layup, which put them in front. Free throws the other way. McGuire went nuts, got a technical. So three free throws. They got the ball. All of a sudden, North Carolina State down 1. They're up 4. A few seconds later, another technical on McGuire. Bo Ellis got called for goaltending. More free throws. Within about 50 seconds, NC State won a 10-0 run, mostly because of McGuire going nuts like that and giving them extra possessions with his technicals. And that's how the margin pretty much stayed the rest of the game. So Al McGuire really cost NC State. He even admitted it after the game that he cost Marquette that title game. Anyway, 50 years later, they get their rematch here on a Friday night. And I think, they're the underdog here. They weren't in 74. But I think they got a shot here. I have been riding NC State, and what I like about them is they don't have to rely on 3-pointers like a lot of these teams do. I mean, in DC, in the ACC tournament, they take about 17 per game across 5 days. That's pretty modest, and pretty similar last weekend in the sub regionals. They can shoot threes if they need it. Horn, Morcell, and O'Connell has turned into a hero for them in the in March here. But it's Burns down in the blocks that prevents them from having to rely on threes so much. They can always dump the ball down to him. He's been so effective. And this team is a lot of people this year said this team is playing under capacity, and all of a sudden they have hit their stride. I'm not sure about Marquette. I know Kolek is back. Last year they were like my favorite team. I liked the way they could run the offense through him or Iguodaro at high post. He's a great passer for a big guy, and Kolek looked good and beyond his injury last weekend. But they let Colorado back in that game. And it took them a while to put Western Kentucky away in the first game there. Something has been a little missing with Marquette this season. I think NC State's got a shot here. I know they're the only double-digit seed left, but they're playing with house money. They're loose. nobody can really handle Burns. One or two of those guards gets hot, they can win this game. So I'm taking NC State. I'd be tempted to play the money line, but let's just leave it at plus 6.5 now, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm torn on this game, Bruce, because you bring up some good points. I mean, Marquette hasn't looked very smooth, I guess you could say, in their first two games against Western Kentucky, although they did end up winning by double digits for a majority of that game. It was a tad bit of a scare, and the Colorado game only ended up winning by four. I think Colorado is a good team, so I'm not freaking out too much about that per se, but you're absolutely right. I mean, there's just something about this Marquette team that does cause some hesitation. I do want to ask you this though, Bruce, because I mean, personally, I think Marquette does find a way to win, but that 6.5 just seems too steep. What do you make of the argument about the momentum, right? NC State had to win 7 games in 11 days to get to this point, and people argue, well, this break will pause that for them, and they won't be able to keep that going. I assume the other side of the coin is, well, they just had 7 wins in 11 days. They needed this break, and they are this good of a team. What do you make of that conversation?
I think they dispelled all that last weekend because the Texas Tech game on Thursday. That should have been the one you thought they would be a little bit flat. They played all those games in a row in DC the week before, and they looked as good as they have. And they looked good all week. I mean, Oakland started hitting some shots, and that was also a game. NC State was favored, and psychologically maybe something a little bit different. But they've been when they're the underdog team, they seem to play very well. But I think they dispelled that tired anything related to the fixture schedule, as we call it in soccer, being so jammed. They looked fine last weekend, and they'll have. Although maybe they wanted to get right back on the court after they won on Saturday, maybe they want to play on Sunday again. But I think they pretty much dispelled all that last week.
All right, next game on Friday, we've got the 5th seed Gonzaga taking on the number 1 seed Purdue. So they opened as low, did Purdue, as 3 in the hook, and obviously that shifted immediately. And again, these are early opening numbers at different books like DraftKings, and Circa opened them -5, Superbook -5 in the hook. Right now, a majority seems to be 5 in favor of the Boilermakers, although there are some 5.5s. So this is a rematch from earlier this year, back on November 20th. Gonzaga fell short 73 to 63. Edey finished with 25 points, 14 rebounds in that game. The Bulldogs did lead at the half, though. They had a lead of about 9 points at one point in that game. Purdue came back. They led by as much as 14. And again, they ended up winning by 10 points. What do we make here, Bruce? Because my initial thought would be, yeah, Purdue's on a nice little streak right here. The narrative could be them falling short last year, kind of like what we saw with Virginia several years back. But at the same time, I mean, look, Purdue beat Grambling. Okay, sure, cool, impressive. And then Utah State, they just routed, and maybe not that good of a team. So I don't want to fall victim of just, again, that recency bias. And Gonzaga's getting great at the right time. So what are you recommending in this position?
Well, yeah, they also played last year, and Purdue beat them last year too. So they have beaten them each of the last 2 years. That first meeting this year, very early. It was November 20th, Maui tournament in Honolulu, where they played it this year. And Gonzaga had the lead at halftime. The second half, though, the lid went on the bucket. They couldn't shoot. And defensively, they didn't actually play all that bad. Edey got his points. But Gonzaga is a much different team than they were early in the season. It took Mark Few a while to fit. I mean, this team had to play differently than it has the last couple of years. Drew Timmy, the offense actually ran through Timmy the last couple of years. Got in the
Mhm.
low post, could pass so well. And in the portal, Few went after a few guys in specifics. He needed a guy to take Timmy's place, so found Graham Ike from Wyo. He needed a new point guard, so he found Nemhard from Creighton. Those are two of the top 5 guys maybe of the whole portal. He found Steele Venners from Eastern Washington to be the spot shooter he wanted out in the perimeter. Venners got hurt in preseason camp, though, lost for the year. And that took, one, it impacted the depth for a few early on, and two, it took away their best 3-point shooter. So they weren't shooting threes too well until past midseason. And Few tweaked the lineup a bit, and he put Ben Gregg, who's 6'10, but he goes out to the perimeter a lot to shoot. It sort of loosened up things on the offensive end, and that's when Hickman started to hit threes. And Hickman had a stretch of about 6 games where he's hitting about 55%. All of a sudden, teams that weren't defending the perimeter against Gonzaga had to do it because these guys are hitting their threes. So, still, what's going to happen here? Purdue is very. I was slow to come around on Purdue this year and seen them blow these tournaments. I mean, the funny thing I haven't said here in this past week, what do North Texas, St. Peter's, and Fairleigh Dickinson have in common? Well, those are the three teams that knocked Purdue out each of the last 3 years. So they would seem vulnerable. But I think Painter sort of borrowed a page from Mike Budenholzer with the Bucks a few years ago, and he basically he stationed four spot shooters out there around Giannis. And there's a not Giannis and Edie are not the same player, but the same concept here. They've spread the floor with shooters, those guards, Lawyer, Smith. Um, I mean, they're shooting the three a lot better this year, and that's when Purdue goes on these runs because all these teams are trying to concentrate on Edie, and it's leaving these guys in the perimeter, and they're hitting about 41% of their threes. That's where they go on these spurts. So let's see how Few deals with that. What I think Few's going to do though is he's going to try to make Edie work a little bit harder defensively if he can. They're going to run these pick and rolls uh, ad nauseum in this game, and all the drop coverage and Purdue does and all that. But still, they're going to try to make Edie move a lot more than he normally does. Maybe get him in some foul trouble. It'll be up to Nemhard and some of those guys, those sort of 10, 12 footers that they might have, if they can make those. But it, Gonzaga is also a lot bigger on the perimeter than Purdue. They don't have the 7'4" guy, but they got three guys who are big. They got some fouls to use on Edie, and they are bigger on the perimeter. I think Gonzaga might get him here. So I'm going to give the Zags a shot. And this team has gotten a lot better as the season went on. The win at Kentucky was really impressive to me. And that was in mid February. And they looked great last week, and they took Kansas apart in that game. And they looked good in the first round, too. So I will give Gonzaga a vote.
All right, I like it. Let's go ahead and move on to Duke and Houston, Bruce, 9:39 p.m. Eastern Time. The 4th seed Duke against the number 1 seed Houston. Just an absolutely bonkers game that Houston was just a part of against Texas A&M. 100-95. They get the win in overtime. Whereas Duke, well, they pretty much coasted against JMU, winning 93-55. So a little bit different for both of these squads. Houston, look, we know how great their defense is. Second in adjusted defensive efficiency, according to Ken Pom. Duke comes in fifth in adjusted offensive efficiency. McCain's been great for Duke in this tournament. He scored 15 and 30 respectively, gone 10 of 17 from beyond the arc in those two games. We see this spread at 4 at pretty much every single shop. There were 4.5. So I'm sure it'll get back up there at some point. People are probably going to look at this game, Bruce, and go, man, Houston almost just blew it there and Duke just coasted. How are we not taking Duke? And again, that's what's dangerous. What side do you kind of lean toward based on what we've seen?
I lean to Houston with the caveat. I mean, if they shoot threes like they did against Iowa State in the Big 12 title game, they'll lose. And that's at some point, I think that's if they go out, it's going to because they have a 5 for 28 shooting game beyond the arc, which they are capable of regressing to. But as long as that doesn't happen, I think the matchups are pretty good for Houston here. I mean, their defense really jumps on you there. And I know McCain had the big game against JMU and Proctor and Roach, but these are sort of finesse guards, totally different. I mean, the A&M guards really physical and they attack. You know, Taylor and Radford, Obaseki really changed things. I mean, those are a little different sort of animals than the Duke guards, and A&M really attacks. And the rough stuff, the Houston, I think they could knock Duke out of what they want to do. I just don't think McCain and Proctor are going to have room to shoot like they did against James Madison. They're going to get knocked around here a bit, and um, you know, just knock them out of their comfort zone. They're really going to need McCain to shoot very well, and I think Filipowski's going to get banged around some too by Houston. Houston wins this game and they cover it, but like I said, unless their 3-point shooting goes haywire, which it's happened recently enough where it bothers me. But and by the way, they're lucky they didn't that game didn't go to another overtime against A&M because they would have lost in the second overtime. They were out of players, so they dodged a bullet. But you have to do that once in a while to win this thing. So I think Houston wins. Duke's not going to be able to do what it wants to do, and I would lay the points.
All right, Bruce. Well, speaking of dodging bullets in overtime, Creighton did that exactly in their last meeting against Oregon. I know you had a tough beat there with Dana Altman and the Ducks, 86-73. They fall short in the second overtime. And look, this Creighton team, I've been incredibly high on. I know a lot of people have, so it's not like I'm saying anything that's really shaking anybody in their boots, but I like them again in this spot, man. I mean, I'm taking 3 with them against Tennessee, and I do have a couple different brackets. One, I have Creighton winning it. The other, I have Tennessee winning it. I think the winner of this matchup represents the Midwest region in the Final Four, and Creighton just overall a very sound team. Certainly Tennessee, the better defensive group, but offensively, Creighton can just kill you both beyond the perimeter and within it. And I think that's going to be the difference here, kind of resembling Illinois and Iowa State, where you have a prolific offensive team in Illinois against a great defensive team in Iowa State. I think Creighton in their offense is going to be able to power through over Tennessee's great defense in a spot where they may struggle to find consistent offense, because Creighton, in my mind, does have a respectable enough defense, and the numbers would show you that too. And they're terrific from beyond the arc. So I'll take the points here with Greg McDermott in this Blue Jays team. Are you in line with me, or are you going against myself here? I think this is the best game of the entire Sweet 16. So excited to hear your thoughts, Bruce.
Well, no, I mean you might be right, and I never disagree too much with anybody. We know the way this stuff goes
Mhm.
in these in these games, and maybe this is the year for one of these two. Maybe it's the year Creighton actually gets to the Final Four. Maybe it's the year Tennessee actually gets to the Final Four. Winning a game like they did against Oregon, I mean, they they had to scrap back. I mean, even if some weird things happened late in the game there, I mean, they still found a way, and Shearman made that shot. And they caused some real problems. They are the last team to beat UConn. They can start to hit threes if they want. They've got the big kid down on the blocks. Kalkbrenner, certainly defensively, he's a real rim protector, and he can score some as well. So, I mean, I like Creighton. I think they missed a little bit of Kaluma last year, gave them a little bit more explosiveness, but I mean, they're awfully good. And that win over UConn a few weeks ago certainly suggests that. I have always thought this year, though, by me, when they're hitting on all cylinders, I think Tennessee might have been the best team in the country, and that would be on the games. Dalton Connect was really hot, and he was so much this year. He was totally, I don't want to say unexpected. We knew he was good on Northern Colorado. He has really flourished being around better athletes this year, and he's a very tough matchup that even Rick Barnes a little surprised at how good he was, but the fit has been perfect there. And with the veteran point guard and Ziegler, they are physical down in the blocks, and they do is going to be a good matchup against Kalkbrenner. So I think he might neutralize him somewhat. But a lot of psychology here. I mean, Creighton, I think, now feels it can win after winning a game like that against Oregon. Like I said, you need to win one of those to win
Right.
in the dance. Tennessee almost blew it against Texas. A different sort. They won by 4, but it felt very nervous there. So my thought all year about Tennessee was they have always bumped their head at the Sweet 16 under Barnes, and they have never gotten to a Final Four. All the great teams they had, back to Ray Mears and Don DeVoe with Dale Ellis and Bruce Pearl's teams, and even some other Barnes teams. If they can get past the Sweet 16, this might be like when the Washington Nationals in 2019 finally won a playoff in that wild card game against the Brewers, and that got that monkey off their back. And all of a sudden,
Right.
they got hot, and they feel, oh, we can win a playoff, and then they end up winning the World Series. This might be the same for Tennessee, and this would be the game. They got to get by the Sweet 16. Uh, I'm going to lean to Tennessee here a little bit. I understand the Creighton argument here, so I'm not going to downgrade that too much because that can certainly happen. I'm assuming Tennessee is going to step it up. Then at Connect is the different element this year from all their teams that have fallen short right at this level in recent years. So I'm going to lean to Connect, and this might be the year Tennessee gets to the Final Four. It might be Creighton's year too. So I like that angle, but I'm kind of going with the orange here, and we'll see what happens.
No, I hear you, Bruce. I mean, look, in general with March Madness, you can't be shocked with anything that happens, and especially a matchup like this, where again, I had both these teams going to the championship. The winner of this game, I do think, what represents the region in the Final Four and has a legit chance to go the whole way. So, yeah, either result's not going to shock me. I just think the market. Again, my estimation, and who's to say what my estimation means, but catching 3 points seems very attractive in a game that could essentially be deemed a coin flip. But nevertheless, a great one to look forward to regardless. So, Bruce, before we get you out of here, I just want to ask you, kind of the generic question that I'm sure you get asked left and right nonstop. At this point in the tournament heading into the Sweet 16, if you had to narrow down two teams that you would put your money on now in the futures market, again, the prices have changed, and it's not saying that Bruce is doing this, but just for people who want to get invested, which teams would you recommend to those bettors out there that want to get involved now?
It's no fun to play UConn because they're the favorite. So all these, I like to have a little fun with it and make the payoff worthwhile. So I would actually say NC State and Clemson. I think they
Mm.
could both get to the Final Four, and I think take your chance. You'd get a big payout with either of them, and I think they're both capable of beating anybody left in the field. So I'm, I'm going to go with the big long shots here, because at this stage, I mean, this is not like conference tournament long shots. You're not backing DePaul or anybody here. I mean, you're you're backing some really good teams at a big price, and they're not scared. They're playing with house money.
Yeah.
Very dangerous combination. Have a little fun with it.
All right, I like it. NC State. I'm looking at just FanDuel right now. They're 120 to 1 to win the whole thing, 85 to 1 for Clemson. And then moving over to their final four odds, let's see. Coming out, NC State of the South region would be about 14 to 1, and Clemson plus 950 out of the West region. Again, these are just FanDuel. Make sure you shop around. But Bruce going with the long shots. That's what March Madness is built for, baby. Bruce Marshall, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you find his work over at CBS SportsLine, one of the best in the business, not just college basketball, but a plethora of other sports. He's been doing it for years on years. Thank you very much for your time, Bruce. Best of luck with your wagers, and hopefully we can catch up again soon, whether it be, in baseball and football, whatever it is. Always a pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure, Danny. Thank you.
All right, and there you have it. Shout out to Bruce Marshall for making some time ahead of the Sweet 16 to dish out some of his favorite plays in some of the biggest games of the tournament. First couple rounds, a little bit sloppy to say the least. The favorites dominated, as we discussed at the beginning of the show, so perhaps we get that to flip around. I know Bruce liking those long shots, NC State and Clemson, along with all his other bets. But just to kind of recap what I've got going on, I've got nothing here for this Arizona and Clemson game. I certainly lean toward Arizona, would maybe just for fun on the side throw them into a little bit more chalky money line parlay. But again, I'm not releasing anything on that, just something I would gravitate toward. But Bruce does like taking the points with Clemson. I did want to expound a little bit more on this UConn San Diego State game, because this is one I was waiting to hear Bruce's thoughts on, and I'm glad that I found myself on the same side as him. And it's really hard not to. Right? I mean, this UConn team is just obliterating the opposition right now. Talked about where Ken Pom has them second in adjusted offensive efficiency, eighth in adjusted defensive efficiency. Then San Diego State comes in 53rd offensively and ninth defensively. You want to look at other metric sites like Bart Torvik. They have the Huskies fourth in effective field goal percentage, third in effective field goal defensive percentage. They are sixth with their percentage of shooting offensively inside the perimeter, 58.6%, and almost hitting 30% of their shots from deep. UConn has a slower tempo. San Diego State has a slower tempo, so may not be the highest scoring effort, hence why I lean towards San Diego State saying under their team total, because both teams go slow, and primarily San Diego State, not the toughest offense. UConn, a formidable defense. Bart Torvik has the Aztecs 221st in effective field goal percentage offensively, only shooting 31.2% from three, which is 306. I just don't find it realistic for them to keep it close. They didn't keep it close in last year's championship game. Hurley's kind of an insane person, is going to use all he can of, going, these guys are going to be ready to kick our ass after losing that championship game. And, this and that. I mean, you don't need any more incentive. Look, you're in the Sweet 16 trying to replicate championship seasons. But I'm just saying, he's the coach that I want to put my money on. UConn's a team that if there was a squad I'd want to lay double digits with, it would be with them. So, yeah, I'm laying 11 with the Huskies for that matchup on Thursday. Nothing there with Alabama and UNC for myself. I would gravitate toward the Tar Heels, but because of what Bama has a potential to do from deep offensively, if they start hitting their triples immediately, I get a little fearful of the Tar Heels' potential inability to climb up out of that. So I'm going to stay away, probably more of an in-game betting type of spot, with the intention of getting in on the Tar Heels at a better price, depending on how they look. And then we talked about Illinois and Iowa State, the best game on Thursday night. I took 2 points with the Fighting Illini here. Terrence Shannon Jr. makes all the difference, averaging 23.3 points per game on 48% shooting in 30 games this year. In their first game of the tournament, dropped 26, went 9 of 16 from the floor. Then against Duquesne, not a great team per se, but hey, it's college. He was still able to rack up a 30-piece on over 71% shooting. And then you get Iowa State, arguably the best defense in the country. Ken Pom certainly views them in that direction. First, in adjusted defensive efficiency, but doing the little things right. And it's not little at this point of the year, but what some may not consider as often. And that's how efficient and successful are you at the free throw line? Are you getting those loose balls off the misses? Illinois is. They're 15th in offensive rebound percentage, 67th defensively. 98th through the Cyclones rank on the offensive front of rebounding, and then 197th defensively. That raises a red flag for me. And then free throw rate, Iowa State 106 offensively. The Fighting Illini are 70th. And then they're limiting the damage their opponents are getting at the charity stripe as Illinois, as they rank 31st in defensive free throw rate. And then you get the Cyclones at 227. So they're putting their opponents at the line. If Shannon's getting to the rack consistently, another outlet for him to produce on the offensive side. I think all of that bodes well for Illinois and a chance for them to move on. But I'm taking the 2 points for a little bit of security. Have no issues with going with the money line price, though. NC State and Marquette. I like Marquette. Don't like laying 6 in the hook. This is going to be the top in-game betting spot for myself. If NC State is going to do what Bruce Marshall believes they're going to do, and that's keep it close, then yeah, I'm assuming I'm going to get a better price with Marquette. I think they are a great team. They've just been not playing up to what some of their metrics are indicating. I mean, Ken Pom has them 19th in adjusted offensive efficiency, 21st in adjusted defensive efficiency. I love Shaka Smart. He'll get the boys ready. I subscribe a little bit to the fact that this break in between their play is going to hurt them. I mean, the Wolfpack have overexceeded. Let's be honest. They're 42nd in adjusted offensive efficiency, 75th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Bart Torvik has them 156 in effective field goal percentage and 162nd defensively. They're great at limiting their turnovers, but they don't force that many. And they don't shoot that many three-pointers, 280th in three-point rate, 157th in adjusted tempo. So they're going to have to find some kind of buckets with DJ Burns. But if Shaka Smart can scheme against him, which I imagine he will, I think that adds up to a tough outing for the Wolfpack. But again, Marquette has been playing closer battles, getting past Western Kentucky, 87-69 on the final scoreboard. Not a true indication of how that game went. Maybe made you a little bit uneasy with them. And same with Colorado, 81-77, came down to the wire. But look, watching that game, there was no doubt in my mind the Golden Eagles were going to win. That, again, was a game that just presented great in-game opportunities. And I have a lot of respect for this Buffaloes team, so it wasn't too appalling to think that they could compete with Marquette. That doesn't really scare me. The 6.5 does scare me, so that's why waiting for a better spot for Marquette in-game and then looking to pull the trigger. Gonzaga and Purdue, the only thing I would entertain here would be Zach Edey over his rebounds prop. Heading into the first game of the tournament, I believe it was set at 11.5 against Grambling. Edey finished with 21 rebounds in 31 minutes of play in that game, and he tagged along 30 points. Against Utah State, I did get in on the rebounding action, so 12.5 is where the prop number moved up to. 14 is what he finished with. He got 23 points in 27 minutes of play. That was a bigger blowout, as we know, than the Grambling game. So only 27 minutes, only got over it, a couple rebounds. This is going to be coming down to the wire. I really can't foresee a game where Purdue just blows them out and Edey doesn't have an impact. The thing that would scare you is Edey's foul trouble, as Bruce alluded to. The other thing that would maybe scare you is Gonzaga's not the most frequent three-point shooting team. They are 312th in three-point rate. And they're really great inside the perimeter. They're 7th in the nation in two-point shooting, 58.3%. So if they're going to be very efficient offensively, that would mean not a lot of missed shots and taking Edey out of the rebounding equation. It's something that I'm keeping in mind. and I'm going back and forth with. So keep that on your radar. Duke and Houston, I lean Duke, but it's one of those feelings where, yes, I lean Duke catching the points, but you could easily see them faltering here in just a classic game where the public's probably going to be all over Duke based on what we saw and what we have seen. And that Houston, because of them almost losing to the Aggies and just having a really, really tough game defensively, considering that's their strong suit, people are not going to want to back the Cougars. But here in a sharp mind like Bruce, have some pretty severe infatuation with the Cougars. That leads me to wanting to stay off of this game. And then Creighton and Tennessee. We took Creighton 5-1 to reach the Final Four. As I've mentioned plenty of times, I've got them winning the bracket, for one of mine at least, Tennessee in another. Creighton and Oregon. I mean, look, Bruce is right, and that's the point that I wanted to stress too. You know, you could look at that game and go, man, the Blue Jays are insanely lucky to be at the spot they are. They hit the game-tying shot at the end of regulation. They missed a ton of layups. They shouldn't have been in that game. You could argue all of those things. Oregon was a team riding a wave of momentum. Dana Altman, a great coach, a lot of narrative with his former team. That was going to be a tough matchup in any setting. But Creighton hangs on. They capitalize in overtime number 2, win by 13 points. Those are the type of games that you need to experience to become a champion. Unless you're just absolutely routing everybody like UConn does, that's what you want to see. You got to get tested in that sense. And Bruce agrees, right? And he brought up the excellent point of that. Tennessee winning by 4 against Texas. All right, you could argue they were challenged, but it's more so in the sense that they were a tad bit disappointing. And we have seen the disappointment from Rick Barnes' crew time and time again. The offense has gotten a little bit better for Tennessee, but not that much. Not enough to compete with Creighton, who's third in effective field goal percentage according to Bart Torvik. They shoot the 7th highest rate of threes and knocking down 36.6% of them, which ranks 32nd in the country. And inside the perimeter, the Blue Jays making almost 60% of their attempts, which is good enough for third best in the nation. Offensively, dynamic from McDermott's crew. Tennessee on the defensive front, yes, very stout. We understand this. They're third in adjusted defensive efficiency, 30th offensively, according to Ken Pom. Ken Pom has Creighton 11th offensively and 23rd defensively. So it's still a really respectable defense out of Creighton. In Tennessee, you know, speaking of 3 points, or 3-pointers rather, I mean, they're 309th in opponent 3-point rate. So they're letting their opponents chuck it up from deep. And Creighton in this tournament is shooting 45% beyond the arc in those first 2 games. And I already mentioned they've been a great 3-point shooting team. So if Creighton is getting those opportunities and making them early, how is Tennessee going to come back? They're making less than 34% of their 3-point attempts, and they're 142nd in effective field goal percentage. And unlike Creighton, the Volunteers, they're susceptible to putting their opponents on the free throw line. They rank 256 in defensive free throw rate. Creighton doing a great job at not doing that. In fact, they're first in the nation at limiting opponents' free throw damage. I will take the 3 with the Blue Jays there, and hopefully they prove me right, because I don't want another team from Nebraska driving me crazy and letting me down. We know how that goes. But that's what I'm rocking with in the tournament as of now. I'm laying 11 with UConn, taking 2 with Illinois, and then taking 3 with Creighton. If I have anything more to the betting slate, you know where to find it, burksbeat.com, or on Twitter at DannyBurke5. Still producing NBA content. Baseball season about to begin. Cannot wait for that. So, yeah, make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you're keeping a lookout. Hopefully you have a great and probably better Sweet 16, because I know I got my butt kicked, and I'm sure a lot of you did too. Let's try to get some of that back. All right, best of luck, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, big shout out to Bruce Marshall. Appreciate you all tuning in, and if you like and subscribe to the pod and to the website, stay safe out there, take care, and enjoy the round of the Sweet 16.